Good morning. Oh, it's great to be with you this morning. I'm excited for our opportunity to be together. Our ushers are sharing with you some notes to be able to take notes along with our message this morning. This year, our theme is On This Rock. That comes from Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18, where Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." But to alleviate the confusion of what the rock is, in Ephesians 2:19 and 20, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Consequently you," that would mean us, "we're no longer foreigners and aliens. We're fellow citizens with God's people. We're members of God's household, and we're built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone." So the rock we're built on is Christ. And we noticed in Luke 2:52 that the way that Jesus grew, the way that he built his life, was that he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So the first part of this year, we discussed what it means to grow in wisdom. And now we're understanding what it means to grow in stature. And in Scripture, the way Jesus grew in stature and the way that he led his disciples to grow was through reimagination, experimentation, and repetition. I know that sounds simple, but what I mean is that Jesus sought to get a hold of our minds, to get a hold of how we think about life. And then once he gets a hold of that, to put us in experiences where we test what he teaches against what the world says. And then once we establish that trusting relationship with him, we've got to do it over and over and over again. The things that I reimagined in my spiritual life when I was first baptized are very different than what I'm doing now. There's layers and layers and layers of experiences. The way that I imagined life, the things I thought I would be faced with, are so different than they are now. When Susan and I had the opportunity to go to Russia over the last couple of weeks, we went for the wedding of DJ and Tanya. We'll introduce them in a few moments. They're with us this morning. But we also had the opportunity to visit our son and our daughter-in-law. You know, when you think about your children getting married and going to college and finishing college and then on to the master's degree and then knowing they're going to be in the mission and them thinking about children and when is the right time, you know, kind of the way you might imagine that is, well, the most important thing is just to time it well. Until you go through the first pregnancy and 3 months in, the baby's lost. And then you reimagine that whole equation a little differently. And then round 2, and the baby's lost again. And many of you have been through this. Many of you are going through it right now. And the way you imagine the challenges on the front end are shifting. I'm not saying God's not still in it, but they're shifting. So now as we are in the 6th month, we're anticipating the future. Oh, it's not that there isn't great joy. We're just different. Your imagination changes. Marriage and marriage struggles, separations, divorces, reconciliations, new marriages, fathers, mothers, stepfathers, and stepmothers. All of those things require a shift in imagining life. You start a business partnership with a best friend, and something goes sour. It changes us. Some of our young people are getting excited to go away to college. They're going to start this fall, and many of you can recall that. Some just a few years ago, some, back with Noah when you all were in school together. But you think, oh, my best friend and I, we're going to room together. And what do a lot of us think? Well, you might want to think about that, whether you want a roommate or a best friend, because you might not have both, right? Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't work sometimes, but it shifts our imagination. As Tom mentioned, you look back at your finances and, you're thinking to yourself, man, get that job or get that degree, get that job, get out there and get going. I tell you, the last 5 years have shifted all of that, have they not? So what Jesus says is you might get a certain message out of all of that. There might be voices in the world that get traction in your mind. If things go a certain way and it looks all good and rosy and abundant, kind of the streets of gold for you, then that could put you on one way of imagining life. And if things go down the toilet and you feel like relationships can't be trusted, then that could put you on a certain track as well. And all Jesus is saying is, I'm not denying your track. I just want to know, could I get some traction with you? And that's what he does with his disciples. Look with me first this morning at Matthew chapter 13. Jesus tells a story in Matthew chapter 13 about 4 soils, and he's not really talking about soil, he's talking about hearts and people. And he gives this discussion about these soils, and there's one that's like a path, and it doesn't do too well growing anything, and another one's rocky soil, and it takes off quickly and dies out, no root. Another one's kind of thorny ground where all the plants grow up together, but the weeds overtake the good seed, and then there's finally this good soil that ends up producing a crop. But the disciples, they definitely want to understand what Jesus teaches. They do. They want to understand what Jesus teaches. But you know what's equally important to the disciples? They want to understand Him. So they actually ask Him, why do you speak to the people in parables? Why do you do that? Not that we don't appreciate the parables and like them and enjoy them and they're interesting and so on. We just want to know, why do you do that? Jesus said, well, this is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they don't see. Though hearing, they don't hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You'll be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For see, this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they've closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. So Jesus' answer is simple and complex. The simple part is, between what people need to hear and what they actually get, there's a big barrier. I'm saying things they need, but they're not getting it. That's the simple part. The more complex part is why. How can you listen to something that you need and go away and still not have it? Well, Jesus gives us 7 steps to building a bridge over this barrier of spiritual blindness. Now, I want you to look at the outline we just passed out, and I want you to write these in from Jesus' teachings. Number 1, you can't see what you can't see. You see, there would be a discrepancy between how Jesus analyzed the situation and how they analyzed it. Jesus said, they're not seeing. They're like, I'm seeing. Jesus says, you're not hearing me. They're saying, we're hearing you just fine. Well, see, you can't see what you can't see. When we were younger, my dad used to say, you can't watch yourself get up and leave a room. You're the one doing it. So if somebody asks you, hey, were you upset? Don't look at them like they're idiots. Look at them and ask, do I look upset? Because there's a view of you you can't get unless you include someone else. So you can't see what you can't see. Number 2, you can't be what you can't see. If you can't see it, you can't be it. It's not possible. If you can't imagine something, then you're not going to move in that direction. I can't remember the last time I drove my car up next to a cliff and hit the gas. If I don't see a road, I don't drive. If I don't see a path, I don't take it. Number 3, open eyes with a soft heart, without a soft heart, an elastic mind are as good as closed. He said your eyes can be wide open, but if your heart is not soft and your mind is not elastic, it can't be reshaped, then you just will close your eyes. It's not doing you any good. Number 4, a soft heart and an elastic mind require equal amounts of humility and courage. In order to have an open heart toward God, and in order to allow God to change the way you think, it requires humility and courage. Because here's what happens. When Jesus starts changing the way you think, you might have to go back and change some things you've done and said. You might actually have to go back to somebody who really thinks they've got you figured out and you're on their team and on their side, and for you to say, hey, you know what, I don't think like that anymore. I am a life that has been changed by Jesus Christ. You see, there's fear in that because we are afraid of how they will react to us. Number 5, you've got to trust someone else's vision to enhance your own. I can't tell you the number of insights in my life that have followed these words from someone else. Listen carefully. Let me show you. Let me point out to you. To have someone say to me, do you see it? You know, looking at a picture or something, I don't see it. Let me show you. You see, I have to trust their vision to what? Enhance my own. Number 6, you must train your mind to an imaginative state of being. Train your mind to an imaginative state of being. Don't set your imagination with an on and off switch. Turn it on and leave it on. Allow God to shape you through His imagination in every situation you face. Resist shutting down when you're in a situation that God really actually needs to work. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this just real quickly. I thought of this because it's familiar to us. How many of you know Psalm 23, or at least think you do? All right, let's give it a shot. Ready? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. We're doing pretty good, aren't we, right? How are we doing on this? Is somebody next to you saying watermelon? Come on, people. We know this. Right? Right? He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. My cup overflows. What? You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies, and I am so antsy and angry, I can't wait to get out of there. No, He said, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies, and my cup overflows. I promise you, that takes some shift in imagination. If I'm in the presence of someone that I know does not like me, is not for me, I got to tell you, I don't normally think, Scott, my cup is overflowing. You? Come on, shake your head, yes, no, or maybe. It'll go a little faster. How many of you are, when you're with someone that you know kind of has a negative feeling for you, how many of you are thinking, oh, thank you, God, I just feel so blessed? See, it takes a shift in imagination for God to say, oh, no, this is really a good situation for you. I'm actually going to shape you through this into things that you're really going to need. Bless your life. Make your life more abundant. If you can get this, your life will be better. That's why the psalmist said, even when I'm at a table prepared in the midst of my enemies, my cup overflows. That takes a shift in imagination. Number 7, the most difficult calling of discipleship is the submission of our sight to our guide. For us to turn over the faculty of our sight, what we see and the insight we get from it, to turn that over to God is the most difficult challenge of our discipleship. Our great challenge is not conceptual, but actual. How does this play out when we have the opportunity to join Christ in the redemption of our world? But our spiritual blindness has calcified and petrified our imagination. We get this. I mean, this is not new. I probably haven't said one new thing in your hearing this morning. See, it's not conceptual, it's actual. I want to take you to Russia with me for a few minutes. We went into the church building on the day of the wedding, last Saturday for DJ and Tanya, and beautiful setup getting prepared. This is Tanya approaching DJ on the stage. It was awesome. That poor guy, there weren't enough Kleenexes in 3 counties to save him from the tears when her beauty arrived at that door. It was just beautiful. This is the wedding party, so it was a lot of fun to be gathered around by that. And these are the 2 families together, Tanya's family and DJ's family. And then here is David with Tanya's father. Now, where's DJ and Tanya? Go ahead and be making your way up here, and we'll call you up here in just a second. Where are they? Yeah, come on up here. So what happened is, because I've been over there and I'd already met Tanya, Susan and I did their premarital counseling over Skype and everything, So I'm kind of thinking through this. And someone born when I was born, someone raised when I was raised. Okay, let's just piece that all together. I'm about mid-range with the most of you. I'm 52 years old. So the thought that an African-American young man is going to be happily received by someone raised in the Soviet Union doesn't compute easily with someone my age. Now, shake your head yes or no if you got that one. Come on, you know where I'm coming from? You feel it? So I'm wondering, they assure me, it's no problem. It is a beautiful couple. Well, welcome Mr. and Mrs. Wells this morning. Glad that they're here. So here we are. We go through the wedding, and it's a beautiful wedding, and then we go to the reception, which was an absolute blast. Receptions here sometimes can get so boring that if they offered a break, we would all leave. Over there were 3 breaks in the wedding, and there was nobody leaving because everybody wanted to know what was going to happen next. They really know how to throw this thing, and whatever, happens in Russia stays in Russia. But anyway, so, especially for DJ's mom and my wife, we're just leaving all that behind. But anyway, so here we are, we're at the reception, and it comes time for her father to stand up and give the dad's speech. I didn't know he could speak any English. You didn't either. It's all been happening in Russian up to this point. He stands up, and in beautiful English, he starts with a quote of an old Russian war movie. And he says, "I'm an old soldier, and I don't know many words." And they looked over at their table and said, "But I receive you as my son." In perfect English. It's amazing. It was imaginative. It started speaking and reverberating in ways that he didn't fully understand. Because he didn't bring it into the room, I brought it into the room. And so God began to shape me and say, Don, you do this a lot, you realize. You imagine without me, and then I've got to kind of fight against your imagination to show you the truth. So I'm going to have a Russian father show you some truth. I wonder how many of you might find yourself in a similar situation every now and then. I asked DJ and Tanya to come because we are so thrilled. Yesterday, we had a big day yesterday. We had a great wedding, which was a lot of fun here in the auditorium yesterday for another wonderful couple from our church. And then along with that, we had the reception for DJ and Tanya. And I don't want to miss this opportunity to do this. I want to just congratulate Roger and Tiffany Hazelwood. Let's congratulate them for their wedding yesterday. That was wonderful. And but at the reception, I wanted to say yesterday, and I said to them, and I want to say it in front of our church family again to Tanya, and that is, I'm not an old soldier, and I speak no Russian, but we receive you as our daughter in this church, and we're so thankful for you. And I want to give you both the opportunity to just say a word to your church family.
My wife's a little nervous, so she said that I can speak for both of us. But We just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I've grown up at this church, and gosh, just looking out and seeing so many familiar faces, and everyone in here is family to me. And so we really do thank you just for accepting Tanya and just making her feel like a part of the family from the start. And we really love you guys, and we thank you so much for loving us and supporting us. And Aaron and Aaron also send their love and their thanks and gratitude and appreciation. So we can't put into words how much we really do love and appreciate each and every one of you and everything that you do for us and what you mean to us. So thank you.
Love you very much.
I love you too.
Stories help us shift our imagination. And in Luke chapter 7, Jesus used 4 situations. Turn over on the back of your outline and see how he led his disciples through these 4 situations. And I want you to walk through them with me together. Luke 7 starts out with a story about this soldier, this commander, that's got a favorite servant that's dying. So this Italian soldier who's stationed there in Galilee hears about the miracle man, Jesus. So he sends some people along, but there's some front people, the Jewish emissaries of the area, and they come to Jesus and they say, hey, there's this guy that's really good to us, and he built our synagogue, and he's so helpful to us, and his friend, his buddy is sick, and he deserves for you to heal him. The centurion's group finally arrives, and they have a little different story. They actually say, hey, you know what our master really thinks is, we don't even deserve you coming to the house. We understand the chain of command. If you can heal my servant, you say it, and it'll be done. Now, I want you to take a moment on this outline and work through this with me. What did the folks in the town see in this centurion? Well, what they saw was a resource. He's a resource of money and influence. See, and because he got a lot of cash and he built the synagogue, you really need to heal him. Do his bidding. See, because he's an investment. We invest in him and we get stuff out of him. So when he walks by, hey, centurion, how you doing? Glad to have you in town. Thanks for the synagogue. Now, bear in mind, he's Italian and he's Roman, and we don't like either. But because we see him as a resource, we want to make sure we nurture the relationship so that when we want something, we can get it. Now, do you notice the centurion, he doesn't think of himself this way. This isn't a reputation he's created. It's a reputation they've created. He doesn't see himself as some patronizing benefactor. He sees himself as just a humble man. So they've created one story about him. He's living another story. What does Jesus see? Well, Jesus sees a man in need with humility and faith. And so Jesus says, you know, this is interesting. I haven't found this kind of faith anywhere I've been so far here in Israel. Found is the word for see, for discovery. It's a word in the original language pronounced shurisko. It's like eureka. We found it. Jesus says, I've been traveling around and I've been looking for faith and I just haven't stumbled across anything like this yet. So Jesus doesn't do it because he sees the man as deserving. Jesus does it because he sees a man in need. The second story in Luke 7 is a woman with a dead son. She's a widow. This is her only child. It's a sad situation. What do the people see? Well, they see a sad, mourning person in their community. She deserves social compassion. Distant engagement because her son is dead and they don't want to be unclean by accidentally touching him. But responsible reaction as good community people. But Jesus walks right up touches the coffin, speaks to a dead man, raises him from the dead, gives him back to his mother. The people are shocked. They say, God has come to help his people. So he transforms it from a dead procession to a reimagined resurrection, reconciliation, and hope for the community. Third story, John the Baptist, the prophet with a profound paradox. The prophet that was too much prophet. When he spoke from God. Some people liked it, some people didn't, especially the authorities. Jesus says 3 times, when you went out there to meet John the Baptist, what'd you go out to see? He asked him 3 times, what'd you go out to see? You know why? Because if your heart isn't soft and your mind isn't elastic, your eyes can be open, they just as well be closed. They met John several times and never did get to know him. Why? Because John wouldn't play their tune. In fact, that's in the passage. They quote this proverb that we sang this song and you didn't sing along. You see, John didn't understand the benefit of mutuality. You play our song and we'll dance like it's yours. John said, I'm living my life to the rhythm of heaven. Dance to that rhythm or rebel against heaven. It does not directly affect me. So they decided to kill him. What did Jesus see in John? Jesus says, of men born of women, there's never been anyone greater. And then the fourth story, a loose woman. She's got a sinful past. Jesus is at a religious official's house for dinner. The woman comes in and she falls down at Jesus' feet and she's bawling her eyes out, and there's enough water coming out of her eyes to wet his feet and begin to wash him, and she's not prepared, so she takes her hair and she uses her hair. She's overcome with her love for Jesus Christ, and this infuriates the host, and he looks over there and says, well, if Jesus is worth anything, he'd know she isn't. If Jesus was worth anything, he'd know she was worthless. Jesus stands up and says, hey, let me ask you a question. If somebody owes a little bit of money and can't pay it back, and somebody owes an amount of money that they couldn't pay back in 10 lifetimes, and they're both forgiven, who feels it the most? And the host said, well, the guy that had the greater burden lifted. Jesus says, you're right. And that's the difference between that woman and you. You don't feel like you need me for anything except your own social status. She feels like she can't take her next breath unless she found me. What did they see? They saw a woman that was undeserving, not worthy of their best, not worthy of any pain, not worthy of hearing her story, not worthy of looking at her, not worthy of listening to her. What did Jesus see? He saw a daughter of God in one of his own sisters. That's interesting, isn't it? You see, Jesus leads people through stories, and they're kind of meandering through the town, and on the way through, you meet these different people. And one guy, when you walk by him, straighten up and say hello and give a firm handshake. But when you get over this lady, treat her like she's dirt. And Jesus says, oh, well, see, the problem is that you just have no imagination. You don't know how to look past someone's money to get to the reality of who they are as a person and treat them like a person, not as a resource to be used. But you also don't know how to look at people that are different than you, people that have blown up their life, people who can't even bear to use the word mistake because it cheapens the depth of their sin. People who have not looked themselves in the eye in a mirror for maybe a decade. Because all they see is the darkness and the sinfulness. And Jesus says, I see my daughter, I see my sister. You see someone who is worth nothing but closed eyes and closed ears. Let me ask you something. Who's the centurion and the sinful woman in your life? The one that you give great attention to because you think they're worthy. And the one you walk past and won't even speak to because you think they're unworthy. Open your mind to Jesus. You see, the world needs this to happen. The world is such an unimaginative place. We look at old stories and can't get past them. Some of you may have noticed a true story that was circulated over the last few weeks in light of the anniversary of D-Day. December 20th, 1943, Lieutenant Charles Brown was flying his B-17 bomber back over Germany, having been sent on a mission to bomb a munitions plant for the Nazi war machine. But they had taken such heavy artillery fire that actually it went down in history as the worst wounded airplane in the European theater in World War II that actually made it back. One of his engines was already gone, the other one barely running, had a third one that was out of fuel, and a fourth one that had full power. For this reason, they were flying kind of low to the ground. As they were trying to get back to England, they flew over a German airfield. Can you go ahead and bring these up on the screen? As they flew over the German airfield, there was on the ground a German ace, a pilot. He was motivated by several things when he decided to get in his fighter. His name was Franz Stigler. He easily caught up with the wounded bomber. But he noticed something strange as he came up behind it. See, several of these kinds of U.S. bombers had been downed. The Germans had retrofitted them, so they knew this bomber as well as we did. And he came up behind and he noticed, they're not firing at me. There was a rear machine gun. And as he closed in, he could see through the glass that that machine gunner was dead. And then he began to look at the bomber more completely. The sides of it were so shot off by shells, he could see inside. He could see crew members tending to other crew members. Then he noticed, well, that engine isn't even running. So he pulled up alongside and caught the attention of the pilot, Charles Brown. Charles Brown would later say that a white-hot heat just burned through him. He thought, man, we're done. But then he, too, had a strange feeling. Why didn't he shoot us down? He could have easily done it. And then in a rare, strange move, Franz pulled his airplane back and started flying in formation next to the bomber, in a German formation, so that those on the ground that were looking up imagined that that bomber was one of theirs that had been captured and retrofitted. And he flew with them all the way to the edge of the continent. He saluted and flew away. Charles Brown wasn't thinking philosophically at all that day. He was thinking about survival. And they landed that bomber in England. This is the crew with Charles Brown there in the center. The next picture is Franz Stigler's crew. And this is the two men together. The war ended. Charles Brown came back to the U.S., began his career. But he couldn't get that German pilot out of his mind. He kept thinking about him. And then nightmares set in. And the nightmares were horrible because he remembered the flight, but it ended with him being shot down and crashing. This went on for years. So he finally decided in the 90s to try to find that pilot. He scoured the records, looked at everything possible to try to find him. And finally he began posting on military websites the story, and he got a hit. Somebody said, I know who you're looking for. His name is Franz Stiegler. It turns out that Franz Stiegler, after the war, had actually immigrated and settled in British Columbia, Canada. So he looked it up in the white pages, and there was his name. So he called him, and Franz Stiegler answered. And he began to tell the story. And as he would tell part of it, Franz Stiegler would end a sentence. It was the man. So they got together for a reunion. They began to compare the notes that neither one of them could have known. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Franz Stiegler had more of the story. He said, when I came upon you and I saw what was happening, I knew to shoot you down would be murder. You were defenseless. He said, one of my commanders taught me that you don't live according to the code of your enemy. You live according to your own code. And my code was I couldn't do it. There was another element. The reason he had taken to the air so quickly is American bombers, or American fighters, had shot down his older brother and killed him. So when he lifted off, it was for revenge. But something else changed. His imagination. Charles Brown said, I was clutching my Bible. Franz Stiegler said, I was praying you would make it. Well, you can't be a praying man. You're on the wrong side. I mean, we're the ones that would have the Bibles, right? We're the ones that would pray, not you. If anyone was going to show mercy, it'd be the good guys. But you're the bad guys, right? So finally they decided, Charles Brown decided with his wife Jackie, that they would honor Franz and his wife Hyatt. So they surprised him. They got together all of the survivors and pictures of all their descendants and hosted a banquet for him, where he got to see all the people that lived because of the decision he made. Then they became fishing buddies. Their wives became best friends. The men passed away within 4 months of each other at the ages of 87 and 92. And their wives comforted each other. We could use that kind of imagination in 2013. And it needs to start with the disciples of Jesus Christ. In this place, this morning. I'm asking you this morning to give your heart to God. A soft heart, an elastic heart. Let him capture again your imagination. And I invite you to come, share your prayer requests, your hurts, and your needs with our shepherds as we stand and sing together.
Amazing grace, perfect.